Hello, adventurers. My name's Tyler.
And I'm Richard.
On today's episode, we're talking about Daggerheart requiring a bit more work from its GMs. Welcome to True Strike.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the show.
Yo.
Is Daggerheart too hard for GMs in comparison to Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, that's not how I thought you were going to go about this.
These are the burning questions that we're here today to ask.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you already asked, right? I would say off the top. No, I don't think it's too hard for its GMs, right? I think it's definitely harder.
You think it's definitely harder?
I think it's harder
too hard for smooth brain? Me?
No, I think honestly...
No ridges? Completely smooth?
Not a lump or bump?
No.
No, honestly, I think you're probably one of the better GMs I know. So you'd have no issue with this at all because big brain games are your thing.
That's not... I play Morgborg. That is not a big brain game. Sorry, Morgborg GMs. To lump you in with me.
The panels on his GM screen flip. Like, my panels don't do that.
It's also a very short GM screen, though. It's very tiny. They have to flip. It's by necessity.
Yeah, because there's so much.
And, Monster of the Week, no GM screen.
Yeah, you just have to memorize it.
Yeah, there's nothing, because there's no rules. There's
no
nothing
rules.
You have to reference. You just make it up as you go. It's great.
But, no, for real, though, like, with Dungeons and Dragons, right? We'll directly compare the two of these for a while, considering that's our bread and butter and has been for a while. As we slowly transition to perhaps Critical Role's Daggerheart being our new bread and butter, we'll see. We'll see. We're getting there, and we're super into it. We just need the book in our hand, and then we'll
soon.
Yeah, I'm so excited. There's definitely some there, though, where what started this conversation is you and I were talking outside of the podcast, as we often do.
Yes.
In our day-to-day lives. And it came up that because of the initiative system, you have so much of on your shoulders of, hey, I know you have done a couple turns in a row. You've done some things. You're making your hits. You're rolling with hope. This is wonderful. I know you want to do a third thing. Hold that thought. What about you, other player? What are you doing at this moment? And there's a lot of that going around on Reddit and everything else and other forums where people seem to have apprehension of this system and thinking not having a set initiative order is a problem. And that's actually going to slow things down. And the loud players, the ones that are, just love the spotlight, are going to take it for themselves. And everyone else is just kind of fall to the background. And that's where we, hit us like, oh yeah, as a GM, you're going to be very active, very actively monitoring who's going. You don't have to, you don't have to force people to go necessarily. Like, if they don't want to go, they don't have an idea, they don't have anything.
Yeah. You
don't got to be like, no, you have to take a turn. That's not how this works.
Your turn. You're doing it.
You're doing it, right. No, if you can tell me like, oh no, I'm kind of just like I'm just sitting in the back. I'm kind of watching things unfold. That's fine. That's totally fine. Your character's thinking out their next move as this, combat just burst out of nowhere. And perhaps your ranger was quick to action and is like started doing things while you're kind of in shock for a moment. And you're like flipping through your spell book and you're trying to figure out what to do, what would help best. That's totally fine. Let's, give the player a chance to say that, though. So, and then we're thinking, what else is going to be required for Daggerheart GMs that maybe we hadn't thought about?
Yeah, I mean, well, we already talked about this, not really this exact subject, but we kind of touched on it a little bit when we talked about our experience, the first game of Daggerheart that we played, as far as not being used to resource management.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So on the player level, having to track things, like stress and hope, but then on the GM level, having to track fear.
Yep. And that in our first game, we also had the action tokens.
We had the action tokens,
which thankfully that's gone now.
And that was even more that required players. Like I remember I was sitting next to you because we talked about this. I was actually helping you track with action tokens to keep track of what was going on because it was so easy to lose sight of that. With trying to do what you're saying here, which was trying to keep the spotlight on the correct part of the action, essentially. And then you kind of forget that other stuff exists that you should be doing. And now, we've got a little bit of everything. So we've got, you've got your fear that you're going to be having to track. You've got the spotlighting people that you're going to be having to track. A good GM is probably going to be looking at the hope and the stress of his party. So he knows where, or they know where all that stuff lies. If you are in a specific scenario where you're using the environmental rules. Right. As well as any enemies that you may have on the table. So the list is starting to stack up against game masters for Daggerheart.
Adversaries specifically, you're managing what is their health, right? Are they taking stress? Like has a move happened to them where now they've taken stress and you have to manage that because if you max out on stress, even that one, if stress were to be caused again, now that's a damage towards your health. So you're tracking all that. It's not Dungeons and Dragons where other than like spells or abilities, this is a once a day ability for this bad guy. That's fine. That's one thing. That's something you're tracking for sure. But if you do it, you do it. You do have legendary actions, legendary resistances. At the higher tier enemies, yes, sure, it's more you're tracking. But in Daggerheart, it's not just, this creature started with 30 health. I took 10 damage. They now have 20 health. Now I have to look at the tiers and did they damage this? And now how much damage did they actually take? Are they taking damage to the stress and everything else? It's just each creature has more on its list. And all that time, you're also managing your fear tokens, like you mentioned. And are you going to spend some of them to jump into combat? Are you going to spend some of them to do a bigger ability? Don't forget that does cap. And you can use it, like I said, to jump into combat. If your players are, successfully rolling with hope or hitting you time after time after time, you can jump in. You can interrupt that. You don't have to let them just hogging the spotlight to themselves. You can use that fear that they've given you to like push yourself into the narrative. Like, no, you take a swing, and as you come down on this guy, this other creature is going to come up and do this, and you spin your little tokens. And you don't ever want to end like for the night like, oh man, I had all this fear. Too bad there was never anything to do with it. You have so many opportunities to use it up.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you take a step back and you look at Daggerheart and the conversations that we've had around it previously and the conversations that people are having about it online, it's generally considered to be an easier system.
Totally.
When compared to something like Dungeons and Dragons and compared to something like Pathfinder. But I think that there's a lot of nuance to this system that gets overlooked. And it's this kind of stuff right here. So on surface level, I can see how you could make the argument that it's an easier system to learn, but it seems like they've made up for that ease of access with a very robust back end when you start looking at all the stuff that you're doing. So they've made the abilities and everything like that in your spells a lot easier to track because they're cards now, right?
Yes.
So it's all right there in front of you.
It's
all physically in front of you. And they've made, like the, item juggling and item inventory systems really easy and streamlined and stuff like that. Currency's very easy. And the fluid nature of the game also makes things very easy. But when you start talking about all the background mechanics that keep it all running, then it starts to stack up, I think, more. And it kind of tips the scales back, right? So it's like I envision the scales of ease of use and then back end mechanics and stuff like that. And it's very robust on the back end when you start to peel away the layers and you start to look under the hood, because there is a lot of stuff that we're not used to tracking. Like as just regular game masters, you're used to tracking, very minimal things. When you have your initiative, everything is very much set in stone. And it's also, I think, a lot easier to plan as a GM when you have initiative, because you're looking at a very plainly laid out roadmap ahead of you of who's going to be doing what on what turn.
Yep.
Like if I'm on, like initiative tracker and I'm looking at my party that's there and I have the rogue is on deck, and then right after that, I've got a sorcerer that's going to take their turn, and then the fighter. Those are three different turns, like very, very different mechanically turns.
Yeah.
And it's very easy for me to look at that roadmap and know what's kind of coming. Right, because I know what abilities my rogue has. I know what abilities my sorcerer or spells my sorcerer has. I know the fighter's just going to hit it with a big axe. So it makes combat a little bit more predictable. Whereas you take those three classes and now you tell me there is no initiative, right? And any one of these players can act, and then in turn I can respond if I have the right currency to be able to do so. That starts to make the combat a lot less predictable and a little bit more mechanically engaging and possibly more difficult.
It's even stuff like your turn, right? I know when my turn in Dungeons & Dragons is coming up, there's nothing I can do to change that.
Yes. Yeah.
It's set in stone. In Daggerheart, I take my turn, you take your turn as the player, you miss, I go.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, I'm going again now. And then, who am I attacking? Which adversary am I spotlighting in this moment? And that's something where, and I'm not activating all of my creatures. It's, unless I have the fear to do so and everything else, whatever. I'm activating like one. Like it's a little more actively participating and planning ahead in that situation of, all right, if this one turn goes one direction to the other, what am I going to do? I'm not planning like 4 players down the road when it gets to me, and I'm going to do my big cinematic moment, and then they're going to have 4 turns before it gets back to me to react.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm going to hurt all of these people with a big AoE, but it's okay because the cleric goes after me. And I know they've still got a mass healing word that they're going to break out. They're going to, be the heroes to bring everyone up, save the day. And it's going to be this cool like cinematic ending where they're all going to come up after being all knocked down, and they're going to wail on me, and I'm low on hit points. They're going to take me out. You're going to have a little bit back and forth of, trying to actively manage encounters on the fly. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's just a different thing.
It's just a different thing. I think it's going to be something that's going to be a bit of a learning curve for a lot of GMs, just because of the nature of that idea of how much do you prep for a thing versus how much do you do on a fly.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting that as game masters, we, until now, for the most part, when I think about most TTRPGs, when you think about how combat interacts, like Daggerheart has made me change the way I think about this kind of thing, because of the fact that before you would think about combat as this very specific little box, right? As in like, okay, we have scene 1, we're coming into the room, we have a discussion, end scene, now we're in this box that is the combat box, and we're in here. We're not going to get out of here until somebody dies.
Yeah.
Right. Until the party dies or this big bad dies. Once this big bad dies, then we move out of that box and we move into the next scene.
Sure.
And Daggerheart has made me look at that differently and look at it without the walls, without the box, because now you have to be, I think, thinking about combat in a different way. Instead of just entering the combat scene and then exiting the combat scene, because it doesn't have to be that way. And then technically it didn't have to be that way with Dungeons and Dragons either, right? It didn't have to be that way with a lot of TTRPG systems. But I think we fall into that trap of this is how games are done.
Yeah.
And this is how people play these games. And it's really easy to get stuck into that when you have something like the initiative system. Because with an initiative system, you're rolling that initiative and it feels like you're now locked into combat. The combat music begins, you have initiative. Now, if I, in, Dungeons and Dragons, find a way out of that. So I stop the combat music and we pull back, and then we have to go back into combat. Then we're either going back to the original initiative we were at, which doesn't feel natural, right? Or we're ruling brand new initiative, because now we're starting a new layer of combat kind of a situation,
right?
Versus the fluidity nature of what we are seeing in Daggerheart, where combat isn't necessarily this concealed event where you can kind of slip in and out, where it can happen or it cannot happen, just depending on how a scene plays out. And it's a lot easier without having initiative kind of giving you that, like, that false tie down, because it's not real. Right. It's not like a real constraint. There's not a rule in D&D that says once combat starts, it has to remain combat until someone dies. But more often than not, that's what we see. And is it because we were trained like that? And is Daggerheart retraining our brains? Because I feel like it's retraining my brain. Because even in games like Monster of the Week, I still fall into that box of, like, there's no, real initiative there either, right? But I still fall into that box of, like, we're in a combat scene, we're going to stay in a combat scene till we're not in a combat scene.
Yeah. Your Devil May Cry, red walls come up.
Yes.
Battle music begins, and you fight until the fight is over.
And like I said, it's weird because that is something that is, like, it's institutionalized into us, right? That's how we feel like TTRPGs are supposed to be. And it's, like I said, there's no hard, fast rule in any game that I can think of off the top of my head that says that once you're in combat, right? You're not going to be doing anything else. There's no talking other than as a free action, but that's it.
It's funny because this, based on everything you were just saying, it just came to me. It reminds me of the evolution of Final Fantasy. And you look at, every Final Fantasy up until, 15?
Yeah.
Where, or maybe that's not exactly true, but you'd run around, and then an encounter would start, the screen would fade, and then it's your guys and the other guys, and you would take turns hitting each other.
Yes.
And then the fight would end. One, winner, loser, whatever. And then now you are actively running across the field. And sometimes you can choose to fight a thing. And if you're tired of fighting the thing, you can run away or you can whatever. Because it's open world in that open environment. And you run around and you are actively just naturally, bringing yourself into encounters and, in and out of them as you please. For the most part, other than like set boss battles and stuff, which will, I assume, still happen in Daggerheart. You're going to have cinematic moments where you have to fight the thing.
Yeah, you're going to have to fight the thing, and they're not going to be able to back away from it. You're not going to be able to talk your way out of it, kind of situation. I mean, you could probably try.
Yeah, totally.
But there's going to be instances of that. I would assume as such.
So at that point, are we just at the part of time where tabletop is catching up to the virtual gaming? The tabletop RPGs have caught up to the virtual RPGs. It's just
interesting because, like I said, there's being no rule for that. It was interesting that Daggerheart kind of made it very clear and apparent to me.
Yeah.
Right? Because I watch it and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. How come I'm so conditioned to look at a TTRPG like an old school RPG?
Yeah.
Like what brought me to that? Like what brought me to that very narrow hallway of this is a scene about talking and this is a scene about fighting, and there cannot be very much intermingling between the two.
Initiative is a wall.
And initiative feels like it's that wall.
Yeah. You have to stop everyone. You break the immersion for just a moment, but you have to. It was mechanically required to tell everyone, it doesn't matter how fast you are. Doesn't matter how observant you are, that you saw this coming, or that you said, "Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and start to swing at this guy," unless your GM is like, "Oh, you know what? It makes sense. They have no idea you're coming at them." And even then, is it like a surprise round sort of thing? Did you get the drop on them, whatever? But at the end of the day, you're saying, "Hey, roll me a dice. Tell me your number. Like, what is your initiative? Let me write all yours down really quick. Let me write mine down, and let's go." Versus, if I'm playing the mayor of a town, and you're like, you know what? I don't trust this guy at all. I'm gonna stab him in the back. And I'm like, well, he didn't expect that at all. Yeah, you stab in the back.
He didn't see that one coming.
Right. And you do so. What's the damage? Like, did you hit? All right, you hit him. Roll me, what'd you get to damage? Yeah, that for sure. Your past is evasion. Ooh, wow, that's a major wound. Like, all right. You roll with hope. You hit. All right. Who's next?
Yeah. What else is everybody else doing?
Right.
Yeah. Are they all coming in on this? Is this like, we
Right? Are the
you
rest
the only one that
engaging in
doesn't
this?
like them?
Is anyone
Or
like
is
is anyone
anybody
jumping in to
else?
stop
Yeah.
this? Like what's going on?
Which also, like I said, that kind of brings me back to my other point there, which was like it's a lot easier to plan as a GM when you know what your party's going to do, and you have an idea of what your party's going to do.
Oh, there's just totally.
There's no rules now,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to, which is like, is any encounter possibly a combat encounter?
Is every social encounter?
Is every combat encounter possibly a social encounter? Right. So I think it's going to. I mean, I hate to say that it's going to require more prep from a GM, because is it going to require more prep? It depends on the kind of GM that you are.
I was going to say, I don't, at least from me, I can only speak to my style of running games and stuff. I don't foresee it involving more preparation. I just foresee the list of things I'm tracking on a moment to moment basis doubling. Like it's going to go up.
Well, I don't know though, because like if it really does open the idea that anything is possible to your players, are you really not going to think about, well, what happens if they try and stab the mayor? I have to have a plan for if they try and stab the mayor.
Well, I can't say I don't always think that anyway, right? It's just normally if you break it out, you do have some more time to like.
There's a plan for every town official that we meet? I didn't know this.
Well, I mean, you've killed at least one of them so far.
That would not directly responsible for the death of.
You made him vomit
Technically.
slugs.
Responsible for the death. I didn't kill him. That's not fatal.
It didn't help.
That is not
It
fatal.
didn't help his
Not
argument.
fatal though. But yeah, I mean, like it seems on surface level, what I'm saying here is that it does seem like it's going to require a bit more prep time from a game master.
Fair enough.
Thinking ahead, because like I said, that whole idea of knowing the roadmap of your party, like knowing what your party is capable of and what they're going to do in a given situation. And thinking that most people probably aren't going to be tapping into any abilities that are combat related outside of your set combat zones that you have set up or possible encounters that you have kind of laying in the wings. Because I think that's another thing too, is that I think it's easy to forget about spells and abilities that are not directly utility versus damage in combat.
Mm.
So it's really easy to forget about spells and the utility of spells outside of combat to like accomplish something, to do something.
Sure.
Like, you know, a fireball is cool for killing a room full of goblins, but is also cool for starting a massive fire in the distance as a distraction. Or destroying a structure or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know, is it going to change the way people play enough to the point to where it's going to change how you GM and how you need to approach GMing? On top of the fact that the original point of this was a lot more stuff to track.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me is tracking that stress and the health at the minimum, right?
Yeah. Stress and health at a minimum per character.
Just those two things. Now I'm tracking at least 2 bars.
Mm-hmm. You're probably going to want to know how much armor they have, right?
Well, I mean, you're going to have their armor score or, you know, everything like that. So you're not using like armor points and stuff. You mean just like what their like evasion is and stuff?
Yeah, what their evasion is and everything.
You're going to have
like
all
that,
their, yep. So yeah, you're tracking stress, tracking your health. You have to have all their stats, what their abilities are. Do the abilities involve using fear to use special abilities? Is there an environmental effect in the area that they're in that uses fear to activate? Much like the encounter that was in the one that I can't remember the name off the top of my head. The one that comes with the beta, at least the original beta, where I could use fear to bring up zombies. Essentially.
Oh yeah.
And that wasn't a monster or an adversary. That's the environment. So now, does the environment have an ability?
Yeah.
And is that something, if there's a module of some sort, does it tell you? Or are you just planning that ahead? Or are you like in the fly, like, you know what? They're an abandoned warehouse. What if every round, if I spend 3 fear, beams will fall from the ceiling and they have to, make, rolls to see if they can avoid the falling beams. And if they hit, maybe they're prone. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting because like you start to think about things like that. So you think about environments, right? And that is something that if you're not playing with environments, which a lot of people aren't, and you're trying to think of like systems. So like systems off the top of my head that we've played with that have environmental effects. Dreams and Machines is a good one for that.
Sure.
They had some really cool
Yeah.
environmental stuff that I could utilize as a game master and stuff like that, which was really like fun.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about it because on one hand, we're kind of making the argument that, yeah, when you have all this stuff, it's more stuff to track. But a lot of game masters are already doing something very similar to this. So if you want to like have a really engaging environment, you're not just going to walk your players into a room and just say, it's a 10 by 10 cube. It's got dirt on the floor and there's cobwebs in the corners. And that's it. And then there's some goblins in here. Most game masters are going to expand upon that. They're going to be all like, okay, so yeah, it's a 10 by 10 cube. But if they look harder, they're going to find there's a pitfall trap over here in this corner. Or, like maybe this supports on this side of the room are weakened. If something happens, if somebody does a fireball over there, it could possibly weaken that and the ceiling could collapse. And these are all things like as a game master, you try to think of to make an environment more unique and have more things that happen in there. Whereas in Daggerheart, this exists, but they're just giving you jumping off points. So is it not making it actually easier on you? Because now you're not having to think of all this stuff or think of how you can implement a rule that's fair and fun and isn't just going to destroy them. Like, okay, that corner of the room, I blast out the supports and the roof falls. And I've just got to really quick make up how much damage is going to be. I don't know, 30d6 sounds fair, right?
I'm just
and then you accidentally just destroy one of the wizard happens to be over there. And he's like, how many d6? Did you say more than 2?
I'm just stuck on fireball in a 10 by 10 room.
Oh yeah, 10 by 10 room. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my god. You're like,
okay, have you met our group? I mean, there's going to be somebody that would cast a fireball in a 10 by 10 room. And
it's
I
just
guarantee
funny that
you there's somebody at
to.
your table that's going to shoot a fireball in a 10 by 10 room. But yeah, is it not technically easier at that point? Because it's making a system that exists that is just there on the paper where you don't have to put any thought into it. You don't have to put any, like preparation into it. It's just there. And you decide if you want to use it and you decide how to use it. And the mechanics are just there for you. So it's actually not even harder for some of these things. One could argue that it's easier. It's never been easier.
Well, those are things that
there's just more things to track.
A lot of your examples are ones that, are from the player's side, like facing though, right? Like if the player wants to destroy a support beam or something.
Maybe not.
The GM's like environmental effects are its own separate thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying though. Maybe not.
A currency to activate.
You're spending a currency to activate those things. But I mean, I have done that in Morkborg, like in, like basically taking things because I've ran you guys through modules on Morkborg, but some of those rooms are boring.
Yeah.
And to make them more interesting, I have put things in there that can hurt you or that I can do. I just don't have a currency to give myself.
Yeah.
So I just do it because it's fun.
Right.
You're like, are you guys scared? Yeah, I'm going to do this. I don't need how many scared are you? 3 scared or 2 scared? No, it's just, I'm going to do this thing. I don't care how many numbers scared you are.
Yeah.
And it's, these are things that you do. These are things that you do in Monster of the Week, the Powered by the Apocalypse system in general. These are just things that you just do if you want your environment to be fun and engaging and have extra stuff going on it. And Daggerheart makes it a little bit easier and fair because it's balanced.
I'll lean towards fair. I'm not going to say I'm leaning towards easier because easier, I go to D&D, right? And let's say it tells you this environmental effect, or you're going to add an environmental effect. Mm-hmm. At turn 0, this happens. Boom. Turn 0, this happens. The walls start oozing. Everyone within the room, if you stay in the room, you're going to start to take acid damage, right? As the slime from the walls starts filling up the floor. If you stay in here 3 rounds, you will drown. In Daggerheart, it's it goes to your turn and you have to choose, okay, am I going to activate an adversary or am I going to spend fear to do an environmental effect? There is no like, all right, once we get through everyone's turn, this thing will happen. I don't just get to say, you know what, this thing will happen. Because in D&D or Powered by the Apocalypse system, you can just say this thing happens. And technically, you're running the game. You can just say a thing happens. But if the game is telling you this environment requires this much fear to make this thing happen, you have to spend a currency to make that thing happen. Now, and in situations where it is a environment that the books that they're going to release / the core rulebook already has laid out for you, that's great. Is this something you're making up yourself? All right, what's going to happen and how much fear do I think is fair to allow me to do it? Is it something that's repeatable, like bringing up zombies, like 3 zombies for 3 fear, boom? Or is it a slime effect where everyone in this area is going to take 2d6, acid damage? Is that repeatable? If I do it 3 times, does it increase every, like there's layers to it where you can like, oh, if this will stack. And then maybe in that moment, you can take one of those timer dice, right? You take out a D6, put it on a 3, and you say, hey, if this gets down to 0, like if I flip this 3 times, everyone in this room is dead. You can do that. And, that could be fun. I don't think that's easier necessarily. It's just different.
Just different, yeah. It is interesting because, like I said, a lot of games don't have that sort of a thing to that nuanced level. And like I said, really the only one that I can think of off the top of my head is Dreams and Machines.
That's a really good example, though.
Yeah, because it's got a very similar mechanic system to Daggerheart, whereas your players are feeding you currencies, and that currency can be spent either on environmental or enemy effects. Right, so I can either use those currencies to buy those environmental effects, like you said, like collapsing a wall or, like making a trap go off or something like that. Or I can use it to buy reinforcements, even like more creatures coming into the scene and attacking or doing something like that. So it is interesting because I did find that to be slightly more complicated when GMing Dreams and Machines, because I often forgot what I could do in a scene, and a lot of the scenes did have that option. There was quite a few scenes that had stuff that you could do, and a lot of times it was easy to, in the heat of the moment and in the action, to forget what you could do behind with your currency. And it actually came to a point where a couple of matches in Dreams and Machines where I had maxed out on currency because I wasn't properly utilizing it.
And I think that's going to happen in Daggerheart for
and I can
GMs.
see that easily happening in Daggerheart, and why it could possibly be a little bit overwhelming, because you're going to have to figure out that balance of making sure that you're utilizing the stuff, period, so that you're not just stacking it up and really offering nothing from your side of the table. And making sure that it's utilized fairly to where everybody enjoys it too.
Totally. I worry some GMs newer, as people are learning the system after release, or even, playtesting now, are going to feel like it's weighted unfairly in the player's favor because they're not properly
properly GMing.
Yes. And I remember even in Dreams and Machines, we ran into a situation where we got to a end of session encounter, and you
I do
burned
remember this.
through your currency.
Yeah, burned through every bit of my currency.
And when it got to my turn and I went all out on an ability, you had no recourse. You had no defense.
No
because
recourse,
you had
no
nothing
defense.
left.
Yeah.
And situations like that might happen. So there's got to be this balance of learning of like, know when to hold them, when to fold them. Like, do you need to keep some fear in the back pocket, or do you want to spend it on this really big move or something? We'll find out.
Yeah.
We'll find out. I mean, we're not going to sit here and pretend like we're masterful Daggerheart, game masters. The game's not even out yet. I can't wait to go through that and really like figure all that out. And, if we have enough, and do have like good thoughts and stuff, we'll do like a tips and tricks or whatever, GM advice after the book gets here. But, for now, just giving some thoughts ahead of time.
Yeah. I would really, what metric I would love to see, which we're never going to see, or at least not until after it's out for a little while, is I would love to hear from somebody who has never GM'd a D&D game, and their first game is Daggerheart. I want
their first time GMing?
Their first time GMing.
Okay.
Because I think it's a different enough system that I wonder how much of this system is just so intuitive and will come naturally if it's your first system learned. Like if you're not relearning and retraining your brain, right? And trying to figure out how to do a new game. Because a lot of times new systems can be daunting, especially when you're set in a way. Like if you've, been GMing Dungeons and Dragons for 10, 15 years, and then you try a new game, it's going to be harder for you to grasp some new stuff because you're going to be so ingrained in systems that already exist.
Sure.
And I'm wondering how well people will fare with it as a first-time game system, which I would love to hear from people that this is their first foray into running actual games, being Daggerheart as their first one. Is it going to be more natural, this balancing act of spotlighting your players and managing your fear and everything like that? Is it going to be easier for those folks than for the old hats that are, stuck in their ways or their systems that they're so used to that they don't want to change from or are hesitant to change from?
Yeah. So anyone out there listening, if you've played it, or, if you've played ran games before, or if this was your first thing, please let us know how your experience running Daggerheart during the beta and stuff has been. Especially if this is your first thing.
Yeah,
we'd love to hear from you. I am super interested in that because I look at it from my own point of view of running D&D and stuff beforehand. But yeah, like Richard said, if this was your first time running a game, maybe it is easier for you to. I don't know. It's intriguing. I hadn't actually thought about that.
Yeah.
I know when we did the playtest, not the playtest, the one shot included in the playtest, it was incredibly handholdy, which is fine.
Yeah.
It was by design.
Well, yeah, I was
the
going to say,
players
that's the other
and
thing
the GM.
is that we were specifically, you wanted to really stick to the guns as far as like, we're going to play this as written.
Yes.
Right.
Because we knew things that weren't included. And we were like, we're not going to use that.
We're not going to use that. We're going to follow this as written. We're going to go through this. We had some, newbie TTRPG players at the table as well at times. So it was like, we're going to follow this to a T.
Yep.
Like down to reading every little bit and following it line for line because we want to get the experience that they're presenting forward. Because I think their assumption is that a lot of their target is going to be a lump sum of people that aren't coming from Dungeons and Dragons or aren't coming from Pathfinder, that are just coming from, I watch Critical Role.
Yep. I was hoping you were going to get there. Yeah.
Right.
Which I'm sure.
Because there's a lot of people.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that got into Critical Role because somebody heard about it from somebody. They heard about it from a friend. They saw a clip on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or something like that. Yeah. And it was funny, like, oh, this is an interesting show. Oh, wait, it's a show where people are playing a game. That's interesting. And then, they kind of like looked into it and they're like, oh, this is a game that I could play with my friends and we could have these epic moments. And they get into Dungeons and Dragons because Dungeons and Dragons was that little gateway.
Yeah.
Now it's not going to be.
It is funny where it
going to be Daggerheart.
Critical Role kind of bridges that gap between podcast and audio drama.
Yes.
And in a world where podcaster, people listen to them more and more regularly, you get this one where it's totally a bunch of friends, not only talking, hanging out and stuff like that, but they are telling a story together.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm sure there's everyone in our circle plays the game and stuff, but there's definitely a lot of people out there that have never touched the system.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, maybe Daggerheart being created and pushed by these people they listen to every week. Maybe this will be the one they give a try, especially like, oh, it's a newer system. I can start at the ground. I don't got to feel like people have been playing this for 50 years and I'm going to feel pressured to know the ins and outs of a system already. We actually know someone who is trying to get into the game right now, into Dungeons & Dragons. And they've mentioned that they just don't want to sit down at the table and feel like they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And we both talked to them, be like, that's not going to happen. There's just play it how you want to play it. You can go all in on your role play, or you can just kind of just tell us what you want to do or what you would do. And you're going to get back from what we put into it. And that's totally fine. There's no judgment at the table or anything like that. But every table's different. Maybe some tables do have the expectation that you come with your, spear sharpened
Yeah.
and your grimoire filled. But Daggerheart being the newer game, even those very experienced tables are also starting at the ground level.
Yeah, they're starting at a ground level. And from a stand back perspective, from a technical standpoint, look at the comparisons. You look at something like Dungeons and Dragons, and on its face value, you've got what, 3 core books, right? That you're looking at. You have your Dungeon Master's Guide, your Player's Handbook, and a Monster Manual. And then you look at, in comparison, Daggerheart. What do you need? It's a very smaller, more concise package.
Yeah, about a third of the price.
At a third of the price, nonetheless. Yeah. So it's like from just a purely visual technical standpoint, there's a lot less going on in the Daggerheart, little universe. It's a lot less daunting, especially for a new GM. Like if I'm going to tell you, okay, I want you to start GMing a game, or they're interested in GMing a game for your friends, and they go on, they look and say, okay, what kind of game system do I want to run? Do I want to drop the kind of money that is required or looks like it's required to run a Dungeons and Dragons game versus a Daggerheart game? Or do I even look at Pathfinder and how complicated it looks on surface surface level? Which one what are they going to choose? Especially a new coming TTRPG player, somebody who is coming off of the show and they're like, hey, I want to hang out with my friends and have a fun little drama story time.
Yeah.
But I don't know what system is going to be the easiest for me to learn and the easiest thing to jump into.
Based on the little one shot they included in the playtest, I think this is going to be such a good game. This is one of those things where I'm like, man, I wish I was in high school and I was learning TTRPGs all over again. Because to just go to the store and be like, oh, what if we all pitch in to get this game? Like, oh, who's going to run it? Someone falls in the spirit. They're like, okay, I'll run it. Not realizing that they've just signed their life away and will never get to be a player. And they go and they all go home. They open this up and they read through it. And if the core book includes that same, adventure or something similar, then it's just going to walk you through everything. You're going to hand out your character sheets. Everyone's going to go through at the same time, pick out what species they want to be. They're going to pick out what's your class? Here's the card for that. Pick out your other cards for your, domain abilities and things. And every time, you level up, all right, pick between these, these cards. Here's your new one. And just placing that in front of you and not having to reference the player's handbook or jot down a expansive, ability for a spell or cross-reference, all, different things for your maths and everything else. And just being able to have it all in front of you as physical cards is it's simultaneously limiting in the fact that oh, I don't have a billion options like you might in other tabletop games. But sometimes really good creativity comes from being limited.
Limited, yeah.
And I'm not looking at this game as limiting at all when it comes to my creativity. And I think that is one of the best things Dagger has going for it. Because if I know my character has these core abilities and everything else is flavor, guess what? My turns are going to go so much faster if I'm a player.
Yeah.
And if I have a quicker turn that rolls into you, the other player, getting to take your turn, and it's quicker, and then it bounces back to me, the GM, and bounces back to you, and I, the GM, am not having to keep track of initiative and all these other things, and we all just get to freeform together, I think combats, social encounters, exploration, all these things are going to go so much faster. And a fast game is something that is going to alleviate a lot of pressure and issues that some people have from these kind of games.
Yeah.
We have players at our D&D Strahd game that love the combat. They hate the social encounters.
Yeah.
We have other ones that don't care about the combat and love the social encounters. It's always this weird balance. And being able to just get through everything with the same level of fluidity is going to be nice. Be real cool, real rad. I'm stoked about it. Doesn't mean it's easier for the GM though.
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean it's easier for the GM. And we kind of threw it back to you guys too. Did you find it, if you game mastered, playing with the playtest materials and everything like that, did you find it to be daunting having to throw it back to your players and really make sure that your players are getting the spotlight that they deserve or want out of a game? Like, was it harder for you to do that when you have players having to step up and speak for themselves? Or do you just have that one person that's trying to run your table all the time?
Yeah. And have your players given you feedback on this?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have done a lot of games in Daggerheart so far, just with the playtest materials. How do your players feel about the system? And something I don't think we've ever actually asked. Question number, we're up to 3 or 10 or something. Out of everyone out there, are you planning on being a player in this game, or are you planning on running this game? Like, what is our audience right now?
Yeah.
Is it just
runners?
Is it players or runners? Are we just chock full of game masters out there? And these are people getting, are you all just listening in for tips and stuff and what's coming out because you care about this game, you're going to be running this game? Or are you all just interested because you want to play this game? Neither's the wrong answer. I'm just wondering.
Mm-hmm.
I could put up a poll on Spotify. That's an easy place to put polls up.
Because both of us, we're the same. Like, we both like playing. We both like running.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's people out there that hate running games.
Right.
They just want to participate in a game. They don't want to have the stress of having to come up with ideas or plans or anything like that.
Yeah.
And there are some people that constantly just have ideas for worlds that they want to subject other people to.
They have a power complex.
Yeah.
Like me. No. But yeah, so yeah, man, it's funny because we talk about that with Daggerheart, and if we got this game right now, I just assume I would be running it because that's just how we've been doing it with Strahd and stuff. But if you were like, hey, I really want to run our first campaign of Daggerheart, I'd be like, okay, I'll get my player ready. I'll get my character right now.
That's the thing, is I think we're both at the exact same place when it comes to Daggerheart as far as desire to play and desire to run.
Yeah.
I think we're on an even keel because both of us would love to run it. Both of us would also love to play it.
Yeah.
There's it's so evenly spaced.
And I mean, like we mentioned before, I think these campaigns I think the system leads well to shorter campaigns
games,
anyway.
Yeah.
So, hey, there we go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we'll both get to do both. Yeah, there's the balance. The duality.
The duality of things. Yeah.
The player versus the GM.
Yeah.
Balance like all things should be.
Just the faster you kill me and end the game, the sooner the roles have to turn.
I'm going to have to tell everyone else, sorry, if Richard's character dies, it's game over.
If any one of you dies, that's it.
No, just
over.
You. Just Richard.
Just me? Okay.
Just Richard.
Just me.
He's the main character
I'm
in the party.
MacGuffin?
You're the MacGuffin, yeah. Oh, yeah, I could have to work that into the story. Let me. All right, I got to go. I got to start planning this out. Yeah, so thank you all for commenting and letting us know your opinions and everything and how that's going for you guys. Wow. We're getting real close to our 100th.
Yeah. Sneaking up on us.
Not next week. Actually, next week will be episode 99, I think, right? Which is technically our 100th because we did as episode 0. Yeah. But we're not going to count it.
That's session zeros don't count.
Right. Session 0 doesn't count. So our 100th is in a couple of weeks. And we'll have a little surprise for then. So make sure you tune in to our
fun
episode 100 for a little surprise. But for now, you can find us on everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm so bad at this. We're almost 100 episodes into this, and I don't know how to outro our show.
I think you're throwing it over to me to ramble
Richard,
off on
where
the
can
thing.
they find us?
I still call Blue Sky Blue Scry.
I messed up one time and said Blue Scry, left it in the edit, and you're like, that's what it is.
That's what it is in my brain now. It's Blue Scry.
Okay. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Scry, everywhere.
Threads.
It's on Threads, yeah.
Yeah.
Hope you've all been well. For now, guys, I've been Tyler.
And I've been Richard.
And we've been True Strike. See ya.
See ya.
Hey, adventurers. Thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. If there's any questions you'd like to write into the show, you can hit us up on Threads, Blue Sky, or Instagram. New episodes release every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to True Strike.